Our next speaker is the Minister for Communications, the Honourable Amy Adams, who's into her second term as the Minister for this particular portfolio, and we've always found you incredibly approachable and also obviously very interested in the sector. And so I'm not going to, and of course you will know that the Minister is the member for Selwyn, so she's a rural member as well. So without further ado, I understand you're going to take questions at the end, so but I will keep an eye on time.
Oh, wow, good morning. Craig, thank you for the introduction. Thank you to Tuans and the Rural Health Alliance for having this event and for inviting me along. Craig, I think you probably needed a bigger room, which is a good thing and just really shows the interest in this area. So let me start by saying, as Craig has indicated introducing me, I live on a farm. You know, my family are rural people. I grew up in a rural environment, and this stuff matters to me because I live it. And I can tell you that when I became the Minister of Communications, first of all, I couldn't actually quite get good enough cell phone coverage to hear that the Prime Minister was telling me I was Minister of Communications. I was kind of hanging out the window, what? And secondly, at the time when I rushed off to Google what that was all about, I was enjoying download speeds of a whopping 0.2 megabits down, which for those of you who aren't sort of tech, kind of means make a cup of tea while you're waiting for the stuff sort of static page to load. Now under RBI, at least I can get a reasonably reliable sort of 5 megs down, which is enough to do most things I need to do. I certainly can't stream 4K TV or anything flash, but I can make a basic Skype call with a reasonable degree of being able to get your point across. So things are improving, but it's a matter of catching up. And I'm pretty impatient by nature. I want everything yesterday, and one of the frustrations I have in this role is that I'd like to sort of be able to flick a switch and just have the stuff all rolled out and happening straight away, and if only that were the reality. Look, when we took office in 2008, and since then actually, the Prime Minister's been quite vocal and consistent in saying he saw two things that were going to transform New Zealand into the future in the way that we've made our money and we've created livings for ourselves. One was the growing importance of Asia and our positioning to really serve into that market and take advantage of what Asia was looking for and what we could produce. And the other was the internet. And if you think about it, it's not really that surprising, because New Zealand has always been the last bus stop on the planet, and we have always had the challenge of getting whatever we make to the world in a way that's still competitive with everyone else is selling. We will never and have never got rich selling to ourselves. We're all about looking outward to the world. And you will know, and I won't go through it in great length, but you will know that we've done that by becoming this incredibly, there's a hole in the stage there, that's a trap, young players, incredibly innovative, number 8 wire sort of country that we've just figured out how to do things better, cheaper, faster, in a more clever way than the rest of the world. And there's untold examples. It's the great Ernest Rutherford quote, "We didn't have the money, so we had to think." Now we get to harness that innovation and creativity and cleverness and still be on the same platform as anyone else in the world, because the global marketplace is on our doorstep, whether we live in Darfield, Gore, Eketahuna, wherever. And to me, that's incredibly exciting. And when I go around towns that we've finished fibring or finished rolling out, as in Wanganui here, Mayor Main is here, who did a great job and really highlighting that in her town. You can say to these towns and communities, it doesn't matter where you live. Stop feeling like somehow you're at a massive disadvantage because you're not Auckland. The reality is you can hire staff anywhere, from around the world, from around New Zealand. You can run your businesses to anywhere. And actually, for the first time, you can capitalise on the fact that you don't have the disadvantages of traffic and house prices and all the things we hear about. And yet you don't have to give up that sort of economic potential to live there. So you really can have it all. So it's pretty important, and we're pretty passionate about it. So the first wave, we committed $1.65 billion to this program. And considering, and you guys would have all heard the noise in the news about tight fiscal pressures and trying to get back to surplus, so $1.65 billion commitment at the height of the GFC was massive. And what's really pleasing is, particularly when I go to Australia and can lord it over the Aussies, our program actually is held up now internationally as being one of the most successful in the world in terms of government supporting the rollout of better broadbands. They're done all differently around the world. In fact, Alcatel-Lucent just put out a report recently saying exactly that. So I think we can be really proud of what we've achieved with that money. However, until I can get every single house in New Zealand connected to a really high quality, good, reliable speed internet, there's still more to do. So you've always got to start from the base that you pick up, and as I said, for me that was 0.2 megs down, and then say how do we move that bar up continually. One of the good news about that is that actually we've spent more on the rural community than we have in the urban per head of population. So if you look at it proportionally, more money is going per connection into rural communities than it is into the cities, but the reality is it doesn't buy as much. So I absolutely hear your frustration that why can't we have the same in the cities, and I've got to equally turn it around and say I'm actually spending more already in rural communities, but the cost to get it out there is higher. So I've got to try and get that balance. So the flip side is that as fast as we're rolling this stuff out, people's use and hunger and excitement and opportunities to do things with this connectivity is growing even faster. So I won't name the person, but I can tell you that when I became the minister in 2011, I had a very senior New Zealand business leader in the IT field say to me on a number of occasions, "You guys are mad building a 100 meg down product. No one's ever going to need that. What a waste of money. Build something lower spec and do more with it." And I have to say, actually, looking back now, in the 4 years I've been the minister, already that 100 meg is starting to just be regarded as an absolute sort of entry-level amount of connectivity and speed you'll need going forward into the future. So we're already starting to talk about, okay, well, so that's the change in the last 4 years. We've got to be trying to position something that's a next generation of change. We can't be doing this every few years when there's a new technology. So how do we now try and use this next fund of money to both increase the footprint so that everyone's getting a sort of a reasonable 5 meg product, and actually increase that speed and throughput considerably? Because 5 is a hell of a lot better than it was, but it's not going to be anywhere near enough. So that's the challenge we've got. So let me just give you the really quick sort of assessment of the phase 1 stuff. So phase 1 of RBI has got 3 component parts to it. Like, I emphasise this because people tend to focus on one bit or another and talk about whether it's working for them. There are 3 parts to RBI 1. The first and the biggest part is the improvements to the copper line network. And actually that's where most of the connectivity increases are happening. So we've got about 85,000 houses already that have had their copper lines upgraded, and we're increasing that at about 46 lines a day. Now that doesn't get a lot of airplay because generally you come home one day and your internet's a lot better. You think, oh, that'd be good. But they don't realise it's because of that sort of RBI program. The second component is the fixed wireless of the Vodafone towers, which is outreaching sort of 250,000 odd people, which is what serves farms like mine, which gives you the peak of 5, although they're looking to extend that out, and you think that could easily be scaled up to 8 or 9. And then the third component of those Vodafone wireless towers is the extra cell phone connectivity. Because one of the things that I've been sort of evangelical about since I became the minister was that, yep, fixed broadband, or you're sitting at your computer doing your work, or your Wi-Fi around your house is great and important, but actually mobile connectivity is probably just as important, particularly in rural areas. And we can talk a bit later on about the machine-to-machine communication that we see with on-farm monitoring and some of the really cool technology that's happening in the ag sector. All of that requires pretty much cellular connectivity. So it's no good us just building a lovely flash network that you can sit at your computer in your kitchen and work on if you don't have the ability to do it on the go. So the other part of it is that increase in cellular footprint, and I can tell you of those towers, in the last quarter we had 1.8 million unique Vodafone alone customers. All the networks use it, but that's where the stat came from. So that means there's 1.8 million individual numbers, not 1.8 million calls, 1.8 million individual phone accounts who are getting benefits from that coverage. So I see this as very much a sort of a two-pronged thing going forward. How do we increase the core wired, but whether it's fixed wireless or wired connectivity, because that's still the core traffic offload. You still have to have those core fixed networks. And how do we improve that mobile connectivity into the future? Now you can run the argument that actually over time that distinction will become irrelevant, and it probably will, but I've got to sort of meet both where we are now and look forward into the future. So, into the future, what do we need? Well, we need something that raises the bar in terms of both speed and throughput for the rural communities, so that it's not just what you can get at 3 in the morning with a sort of a tailwind when everyone else is asleep, which is when I tend to be online, but it's more that what happens when the kids come home from school and it all kind of suddenly jams up. So it's getting both of those components working well. I think we have to be really careful as government to be as technology neutral as we can, particularly in the rural space. I'm very aware of the fact, and some of you will be in this room, that while the big boys were very happy to spend their money in urban parts of New Zealand and make a very nice return off it, they sort of looked at lots of parts of rural New Zealand and said, yeah, we can't make any money there, so we won't. And what happened is a really cool little ecosystem of small local providers sprung up to provide that service. And I think that's fantastic. And the last thing I would want to do is then see those bulldozed over the top of, now that there's some government money in the offing. So I don't want to overstate that, because at the end of the day, when I look to how we award the money, the only thing that I will, well, not the only thing, but the ultimate thing that will be at the front of my mind is what's going to get the best service out to the most number of people. Right? So don't assume that just because you've got a little niche provider, you're locked in and you're golden. Because at the end of the day, if you're not providing a service or can't show us a pathway to provide a service that we think is going to be what that community is going to want to expect in terms of service, speed and throughput, then that won't work. But if you can, then don't assume it's all going to be just a few contracts with a few big players, because that's not how I see it at all. So be creative when you come to us with technology solutions. Show us how you plan to improve and maintain services and speeds, because it's not enough simply to sort of do a bit more of what we're doing. The speed of movement in this is remarkable. Spark put out some numbers the other day that told us that the average Kiwi household is now using as much data in a month as the entire country used in the mid-1990s. I mean, that's astounding. And it's not showing any sign of slowing down. So you need to be thinking about what customers are going to be needing 5, maybe even 10 years from now. I know that's a long time in tech, but it's got to show us that the technology is, if not modular, at least very upgradable and scalable to make those changes. So just to quickly rip through some of the really exciting things I see in the rural connectivity space. I've talked a little bit about the growth of machine-to-machine communications and how we see that completely transforming, particularly the ag sector. So I was in the last term of government also Minister for the Environment, and I can tell you some of the biggest challenges we have in the ag sector are around how we increase productivity and increase output and decrease our environmental footprint. Now I'm incredibly optimistic actually that can be done. I've seen it being done in some cool, innovative little parts of New Zealand. But it's all predicated on the use of technology, and particularly machine-to-machine communication, better herd management, better animal welfare management, effluent pond, pasture tracking, fertiliser application. So you're seeing companies come through like dairy automation, who are doing incredible things with real-time productivity information per cow at the bale. You're seeing companies like TrackMap, who are one of the 50 fastest growing companies in Asia Pacific, who are doing amazing things with better output from fertiliser use, so decreasing the fertiliser use for the same productivity gains. And as this stuff starts to come together, we're going to see increases of $19 billion in the dairy sector over the next 20 years. In schools and in education, actually schools and health are, I think, some of the most exciting areas for this stuff. So yep, it would change the way we communicate and the way we make our money. But when I go into little remote schools around New Zealand and I see schools of 26 students being able to offer those students access to any course at any level that those kids want to do, because they can hook up through ultra-fast broadband to resources anywhere, not only New Zealand but the world, that's when I get excited. Because actually I live in the rural community because I love it and I don't want to have the city closing in on me. But I don't want to think that my community misses out in terms of educational resources or in terms of health access. And those are the two things that have been quite difficult historically. With this sort of connectivity, that challenge is removed. Now the interesting part becomes, and I say this to my colleagues all the time, I'm rolling this stuff out, you guys have got to take it and use it. So as well as being the Minister of rolling it out, I'm also the Minister of nagging, which my husband would probably say I could do quite well. And it is about then getting in front of education, government services as well. We're pretty slack at getting our stuff digital, but we're getting better. And health, and saying how are we taking this and really making it fly. I mean, I know there's a lot of rural health people in the audience, and you will know better than me some of what's happening, but the excitement of some of the stories I hear of how we've got high quality, real-time specialist care to remote parts of New Zealand for emergency situations, how we're enabling better after-hours access to clinicians, how we're enabling patients to get better access to their own information. You know, there's one thing I'm really passionate about, it's about empowering patients to use patient portals and have their own information. Why do I have to ring a nurse to check my test results? Why can't I just log in and check my test results? You know, I still can't figure that stuff out. And also at the elder care end of things, allowing some of our older people to stay in their homes and get real-time monitoring, assessment and help rather than having to go into care. So that sort of potential is we're just starting to scratch the surface. I think there's a lot more we need to do in taking the opportunity that this creates and running with it. But this next stage of connectivity is critical. So in closing, because I want to leave some time for questions, I don't know, Craig will be starting to stress. I read in the assessment, well, the little blurb for this morning's talk or today's talk, that the purpose of this is so that you guys can come together and come up with a plan that you can put back to us for how we should spend this money. Great. I'm absolutely open to that. I think that's really cool. One thing I would say to you is don't waste too much time going on and on about how important it is. Because I hope I've done nothing else this morning, I've convinced you that I know that. Right? We know it's important. And as I said, the only limit is how much money I can prize out of Bill English's sort of hands. But I'm going to make it go as far as I possibly can and try and future-proof it as much as I can. So don't spend too much time thinking you need to convince us about the importance of the rural sector. I get that. What I need to know is how do we do this in the most agile, innovative, cost-effective way and get it out to as many people as possible. And think really creatively. And don't, one of the other changes to this, to RBI2 versus RBI1, is that this is not just a conversation between us and the providers. We have deliberately set this out so that we want communities to be thinking amongst themselves and thinking with the providers about how they package this stuff up. Because one of the lessons, I guess, from the first stage is that we can build it, but it's only when communities get excited about taking it up and using it that it makes a difference. So I want to hear from communities how you're going to support the rollout. I don't want to waste a big chunk of my 150 million on council compliance costs, and I did in the first round. So I'm going to put the heat back on councils and say, you guys need to step up. If you want it in your town, work with me so that we're not wasting money on that compliance stuff. I want to hear about where the critical areas are in the communities that it needs to get to. And I want to hear about how, as communities, you will use that opportunity if it's given to you. So it is a slightly different approach to stage one, but I think it's an approach that gets communities thinking much more about how they're going to use it, why they need it, how they can support it, and then working with their provider community as to how that can work. So there you go, that's RBI2 in a nutshell. I haven't even really gone into all the parameters, but let's leave it there and chuck it open to questions, Craig. Is that all right? Yeah.
Chris O'Connell, I completely share your ambitions, and also, as you know, I've been doing a lot of travelling around New Zealand talking to people about this.
Yeah.
I think one of the things is actually also finding a way that we bring the UFB and the RBI together. We've found numerous examples of rural businesses that need fibre in the country, and also from having spent a lot of time talking to the small regional wireless ISPs, the biggest thing those guys need to lift the services they can deliver is accessible fibre deeper in rural New Zealand. How can we help?
Great. So, and as I don't disagree with you, Chris, but again, no good giving me a wish list. So the question is this: I could take fibre out to more parts of rural New Zealand, but it means I would cover fewer people. So it's just a straight cost, a cost multiplier. So I start thinking, okay, if I've got 150 million. And these numbers are made up, but just to give you an example, it might mean I could take fibre out to 20,000 extra premises, or I could take some other technology, whether it's microwave links or fixed wireless or enhanced copper or G-Fast or whatever we want to do, out to 150,000. So the challenge is for every person I put on fibre, if that means that 3 other people, as I say, made up numbers, but relative, if that means 3 other people miss out on better service, it's hard to make that case. So you're right, I get people writing to me every day saying my business really needs fibre. And as I said, my answer is always, I would love everyone to have fibre, but I've got to start from the position of I have this amount of money, how do I make that go as far as possible? So how do you help? There's a couple of things. One, think about the role fibre plays or should play in that rural rollout. So there's a school of thought that says a big part of the money should be spent on fibre capacity to all of the node points, and then let the market figure out what technology then hangs off that last piece. And of course, the further you get fibre out into the community, the easier it is for individual businesses to pay for the last connection point, and the better capacity there is of whether it's the cabinets or the towers or the poles that then hang off that node. So that's one option that we're looking at in the plans. There could be options around, some of the councils around New Zealand are talking to us about wanting to say, if you come in and do what would look like an RBI build, we'll pay the difference to make it an FTTH build, fibre to the home, sorry for those of you who aren't in that space. So there's also an option of saying, recognising, and actually one of the best things you can do when you're thinking about this is try and recognise the constraints I'm under, which is to justify how that money is spent for the benefit of the most people. So if you recognise the fact that I can't simply give a gold label service to a few people and others miss out, then you start saying, okay, well if the minister's got to do this in a sort of a fair and rational way across New Zealand, then that means she can take it this far. Maybe we ask her to fund the backhaul network of this, and then the community comes in and does the last mile. So that's another option. And then there's options, obviously, just looking at some of the physical install costs with own trenching and some of the detail. There's also hubbing, of course, to get businesses in an area to hub together to provide to support the install cost of that last piece. So it's possible. But as I said, if you look at it through the lens of any one business, I could make a case that I need fibre, and in my house, I do for lots of ways, but the point is, if I were to, well, I wouldn't spend it on my house obviously because I get slammed, but if I was to spend it there, then that's other people who miss out, and that's the kind of the tension I always have to assess. And as I said, we're actually spending more per connection in rural New Zealand than we are in urban. I've got to work how I can make the money I'm already spending go further in terms of technology mix, and that's where the providers and the innovative people in the room, I think we'll do that. Can I just make one point, because you've just reminded me, Chris, from the discussion we had, which is that I mentioned earlier, there's a really cool network of little niche providers doing cool stuff around New Zealand, as you know, and you've been talking to, and I really want them to be part of the mix. But there is one point of, one sort of caveat, which is that the retail players in New Zealand are pretty much large, retail providers who come in and provide service, and one of the lessons from RBI and UFB 1 was that if the market's too small and it's too difficult to go and provide a service, they're just not going to bother. So there's no point us having these flash kind of wholesale networks around the place that have individual little interface systems if Vodafone or Spark or Core Plus or whomever has to come and design a one-off interface for that small customer base. They're not going to do it. So there is a really important point that if you are working with a network of lots of little niche providers, they have to come together to have some sort of consistency of platform, otherwise it just won't work. It can work, but they've got to do their bit. Sorry.
We've got roving microphones, so next question.
Is this down there? That's a bit of a trap here.
Mr. Ernie Newman, just following up on that same theme, there's a time frame issue here, isn't there? Because if you take the view that the end game is fibre to the farm eventually, comes the question of whether you put stopgap solutions that'll last for 5 or 10 years, or whether you take a deep breath and do the whole thing.
Yeah.
Fibre is the ultimate answer, and I'd put it to you that we've already got the power poles. If New Zealand could do electricity to the farm in the 20th century, surely we can do fibre to the farm in the 21st.
Ernie, you're talking my language. All I can say is watch the space. So it is something we're looking at, and we're about to put out some stuff for discussion around some of the changes that would require to make that work. Look, I agree with you. I was having this discussion with officials just the other day. If we can get electricity to a farm, why is fibre so much harder? What would we need to do? So we are having that discussion, and we're having a discussion that's twofold. One is ultimately where are we trying to get to, which is hard because ultimately this game changes every couple of years, but nonetheless, sort of that kind of big picture. And then and this is how much money I have now. How do we stagger those? Because what I don't want to do is, as you say, build a whole lot of stopgap solutions that we then come back and overbuild, in part of a journey somewhere else. The challenge for me is, you say take a deep breath and do it all at once. I would love to. You talk to Bill and I'll build it. But I do think we need to have that vision of where we're trying to get to. And part of the challenge in this is making sure that money I invest now is part of, it will then be able to be maximised for something going forward, which comes back to the point I was discussing here about the extent to which we put our investment in some of the core network capacity and then leave the sector to sort of do the hanging off the end last mile bits. or not. So that's also part of the mix. So if the solutions that come to me look, great as an interim solution, but they're a bit dead end, then it's going to be a harder sell to get me excited about that.
One more question.
Yeah, in the middle there.
I can shout.
Yeah, shout.
Oh, not Marianne.
I was just, you talked about council compliance costs, and I just wondered, now you've got a background in RMA as well, and I was just wondering, what are those exactly? Are they consents? What are the kinds of costs that you're facing?
So there's a number of things. Certainly RMA consents are chief amongst them. Those of you who follow this space, and God help you if you do, we've just put out a national environmental standard on telecommunications facilities, which is intended to try and improve some of that, which is the way in which we can set nationalised, consistent standards around some of the consenting issues, so that will help. It doesn't go all of the way. Let me give you one example, and it ties into Ernie's point. In Auckland, when we were rolling out UFB 1, we found that the plan prevented Chorus running another line over existing overhead connections. So if they had an overhead system for a copper wire, the plan said they needed a resource consent to also pair a fibre wire or a fibre line. And to me, that's just brain dead. And if anyone wants to kind of give me, I shouldn't say, I've got to learn to be a bit more circumspect. My media team will be having conniptions. If anyone can show me that there is a serious, what's the RMA language? A significant more than minor environmental impact from pairing up, you guys know how thick a piece of fibre is, over those lines, I'd be really interested to have that discussion. But the plan said that, and so therefore, Chorus had to either go through a process of consenting or going underground, both of which drive considerable extra costs. So there are certainly conditions like that. There are costs around some of the build work conditions, so whether it's traffic management, some of the way they require that it works better in some councils than others, which just shows me that there is a lot of discretion as to how costly that can be. Right down to things like councils working with providers to tell them where the existing underground infrastructure is. The time and delay and extra cost from not knowing what's underground and what you're hitting and having to work around it. So it goes right from the sort of the RMA consenting right through to the sort of the prosaic and the practical and the compliance cost space. The other part of it is, as I said, just working with us to be champions of uptake and use. And the areas we see this working well are where councils, as the voice pieces of their communities, have said, we're going to take the opportunity that this gives us and really focus on how we turn our town into this digital mecca and position ourselves as a community that can offer it all. So it's both the sort of the pragmatic and the financial, in terms of some of them are looking to come in and say, let's make it go further, and then the evangelical sort of champions of what the technology can do. Very good. I think Craig's getting anxious. So look, thank you very much. I hope that's been useful, and I hope you have a really worthwhile day today, and I look forward to hearing what comes out of it. Thanks very much.